Everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. Lots of listener reaction to our show about the concept of trading Austin Reaves for a center. Who did we forget? What did we get right? What did we get wrong? We'll talk about it next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, Monday through Friday, no matter how, where you get your podcasts. This one's always free, never behind paywall. Locked On Lakers on YouTube is we're over 35,000 subscribers. You could be one of them. 35,000 subscribers, all just trying to figure out how the Lakers are going to get themselves back to the top of the Western Conference next year, despite a lot of work that Rob Pelinka needs to do with this team. So we'll break that down. We'll take a look at some of the Lakers nostalgia as the conference finals are rolling on with a lot of prominent former Lakers deeply involved in that. And of course, I'll take a viewer mail, listener mail question about LeBron James. Are there actually any credible scenarios where LeBron doesn't return to the Lakers next season? But Andy, let's start with our show Monday about Austin Reaves. You kind of made a list of, a couple names we might have forgotten, which we'll bring up here in a second. But we kind of went through the league, starting centers mostly, and just talked about who exactly is out there. Like if you were going to trade Austin Reaves for a foundational piece, that is what Dan Wakey said the Lakers would have to, it would have to be something that good for the Lakers to trade Austin Reaves, not just doing it for fun here. And we kind of went through all the league and looked at some of those names, and man alive, a lot of comments, a lot of feedback, a lot of comments on the YouTube page, over on Twitter at Cam Brothers. And I was really impressed with a few things. First, how wide a variety there is in just what people think about Reaves as a player, how much variety people think there is in his trade value, because that's a really interesting question too. Like, how much value does he really have? And of course, who are these centers around the league that people think are worthy of using that chip?
Letting it be known, this was my list to do, and I'm the one that forgot a few names. The most glaring one that I forgot that I think truly should have been there, and a couple people pointed out in the comments, and thank you as always for leaving the comments even when they are correcting us. We appreciate that. Domantas Sabonis in Sacramento. I had left him off the list, to be totally honest. I think in part in my head, I thought that he had been starting alongside Trey Lyles more than he actually had been, but also because in terms of the type of center that I think the Lakers really need with Luka specifically, I don't think Sabonis is that type of fit.
No.
And if we had put Sabonis out there, I would have said that I would not do that. Not because I think Sabonis is a better player than Austin Reaves.
Sure.
But I think Sabonis is also not a great fit for Luka. Side note, I think Sabonis is this very talented, very difficult player to peg, the best way to utilize him, the best way to build around him, build alongside him.
He's a front court version of Austin Reaves in a lot of ways. He does a lot of the same kinds of things. He's an he's a really good offensive player. He's a wonderful distributor, excellent assist guy.
Great rebounder.
Great rebounder. That's one area where you could say he would certainly help the Lakers. But like, he doesn't solve your defensive problems. He doesn't address your need for a vertical threat. And I think one of the things that we were really, that became clear, that was part of the exercise, is the idea that it's not just a matter of better player, lesser player. It's also fit. You're going to need to get a guy who really works with what you're doing. It doesn't do the Lakers any good to go out and get a star player, a player of Sabonis's caliber, if the fit doesn't work. To use a chip like Austin Reaves, and then, guy like that, but like Jaren Jackson Jr., other players that we discussed, those guys are Austin Reaves and type players. Like you're going to have to add a little bit more to that beyond just making salaries work to make that other team even be interested in what you're trying to do. If you're talking about Jaren Jackson Jr. or Bam Adebayo, players like that are really, all-star level guys, you got to make sure the player you're getting back makes sense and fits. And, Jaren Jackson Jr., I said yesterday on the show that he was not he's a good shot blocker. He's a bad rebounder for his size. That's where he's more deficient as a player. But offensively, he can stretch the floor. He can do all kinds of stuff like that. He's a person you can imagine around Luka Doncic in a way that makes sense. So is he perfect? No. Few players are. Reaves isn't either. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But it gets back to this idea that every move that Pelinka makes this offseason, the fit has to be right, because they can't continue to try to undo mistakes. And like Pelinka's got a remarkable record of sort of somehow extricating himself from bad situations, but like Nico Harrison isn't going to come by all the time to just offer up Luka. It's like a way out of your Anthony Davis, LeBron James core problem. So like at some point you have to stop making mistakes with your fit.
Yeah, and the other two names that people brought up that we didn't mention at all. One was Zion Williamson, who is not a center. He's 6'6". He is only a center as a small ball look. There's also talented as he is, he's basically all the concerns you have about Luka, but on steroids and gravy. Like
right, for real.
Absolutely.
Like, if you're worried about fitness and health.
No, it absolutely not. Zion is wonderfully talented, not going near that. And the other guy that came up was Mitchell Robinson with the Knicks, who is playing quite well during this playoff run. I don't know if I would include Austin in a trade for Mitchell Robinson. He's sort of on the border, but if he were healthier, I would consider.
Well, you left him you left him off in part because you were making lists of starting centers throughout the league, and he's not the starter.
Right, I did, but there was a couple other guys, like when I brought up Wendell Carter Jr. and Goga Batadze, like there were a few like high-end backup guys that
Did you mention Lively? I think people mentioned you might have left Derek Lively off. And I think that was probably because you knew that if the Mavs traded Lively to LA, they would burn the arena down.
Right. I did not bring up Lively because that feels like a non-starter.
Can you imagine?
Right. Like I don't think that that's a thing. So that's why I didn't bring him up. I brought up Daniel Gafford because he's the center in Dallas that I could even sort of conceive of a world where Nico goes back to the table with Rob. But the other thing that is important to bring up in terms of the reaction to this show, and it really did get a ton of reaction, and thank you again, the names that we landed on in terms of centers that we could even picture a world where they potentially become available for a variety of reasons. The team feels like it's at a crossroads, money, yada, yada, that we would sort of consider becoming available, that we would at minimum consider trading Reaves for, if not definitely. Jaren Jackson Jr., Bam Adebayo, Vitas Zubac, Jared Allen, Walker Kessler. I believe that was the list. We got a lot of reaction that was, well, Memphis wouldn't trade Jaren Jackson Jr. for Austin Reaves. Miami's not trading Bam Adebayo. We never said they would. We didn't even address that part of it because for this conversation, we were leaving that to the side. Mm-hmm. We were viewing this purely through the prism of what the Lakers would do, because to us, that's actually more instructive in terms of figuring out what the Lakers can, can't do, will, won't do with Austin Reaves. The whole would the other team do it, that's a separate conversation that for the time being, we're not even going there.
Right. And there's another way to view this potentially, where foundational piece may be the wrong way to look at it. And there is another option with Austin Reaves. We'll get to that next. Locked On Lakers is brought to you by Car Gurus, Andy. And shopping for a car, it should not be this wildly stressful, horrific event that you get the cold sweats and you have to, you start worrying about it all. You ought to be able to, in this year of our Lord 2025, you ought to be able to go on the internet, find a price of a car, figure out if it's a good deal, figure out who's going to sell it to you, and then go get your car. And that is exactly what Car Gurus does. A few years ago, we needed a new car, looking for the car that I want, a price that I need. I wanted a certified car. They had that available. I could find all this stuff I needed, clicked on it, got the price, got the dealership, showed up there. That was the price I paid, and it was over. Got exactly the car I wanted, and it was hassle-free. And it's no wonder that SimilarWeb estimated traffic data shows that Car Gurus is the #1 most visited car shopping site for that reason. So buy or sell your next car today with Car Gurus at cargurus.com. Go to cargurus.com and make sure your big deal is the best deal. I love that feature. It tells you if you're getting a good deal. That's based on like what the same car's selling around your area. That's cargurus.com, cargurus.com. So, like I mentioned, and you were talking about, Jaren Jackson Jr. is probably Austin Reaves, and I don't know how much more. I don't think it's Austin Reaves and Dalton Knecht and the pick and 4 pick swaps and all the gap between those two players isn't that big, but it's probably.
Nor is Jaren Jackson respectfully that good.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, he's been on all-star teams and whatever, but the gap between those two players is not massive. Setting aside for a moment whether or not Memphis would even be interested in that, and I don't think they would be, but whatever. Miami with Bam Adebayo, there's a gap there. The Lakers would have to make it up. Do they have enough stuff? Don't know. The other option would be, we talked about a guy like Nic Claxton and whether or not, like, is he worth Austin Reaves? I think the sentiment is that the Lakers could probably acquire Claxton without sacrificing Reaves, who is their best trade chip. Whether you think he is overrated, whether you think he is underrated, properly rated, or whatever, he is absolutely their best chip because of what he makes next year. And, he's relatively young, can play with a lot of different players, good guy, improving, big, broad skill set. There's a lot of reasons.
And because, to be totally honest, the Lakers don't have a lot of trade chips.
Well, yeah, that's true too.
I mean, I'm just saying he is their best. Even if you,
right? I mean,
he's the best trade chip by default.
Better than Dalton Knecht, better than the 2031 or 2032 pick that they have to offer.
He wins. He wins because I think he's a good trade chip. He also because ain't much competition.
That is true. And he is, though it is worth pointing out, in some ways a better chip than he was last year, because I think last year, in terms of how he played over the course of the regular season, and quite frankly, the amount that he played over the course of the regular season, availability is, the best ability and all that stuff. It is, he really, I think, improved his standing around the league, playoffs notwithstanding, but he also got himself closer to his payday, which makes him a little trickier in that regard. And I think does undercut some of the value is teams knowing that they are going to have to pay him pretty soon. That said,
and that they can't most likely just extend him this offseason.
Correct.
If they trade for him, because nobody expects him to sign an extension this offseason, because 2026 he stands to make way more money, which means he is a potential flight risk for every team, including, by the way, the Lakers.
Right. And I love that term. But guys like that makes it sound like they're out on bail. But that there are ways around that. Maybe you're trading for somebody that maybe he doesn't have to be signed to an extension next year, but it's getting a little bit older, and in 2 years you have to sign to an extension that you'd rather swap it out for a guy who's going to be 27 when you have to sign him, rather than somebody who's going to be 31 or 32. There are all kinds of ways to work around this sort of thing. The other option, though, would be somebody like Nic Claxton. I agree with you. I think that at the very least, you try real hard before you put an Austin Reaves in there. And if that's the best, you probably save Reaves and use him.
That doesn't make you better enough.
Right. It doesn't make you better enough. And because Austin Reaves is really, really good. But you could also, with some of these teams, if organizing some kind of deal around Daniel Gafford, sign and trade, the mechanics of it again, setting it aside. Gafford's definitely not good enough for Reaves. But what if to go back to the Brooklyn example, Cam Johnson is a name that's been, certainly spoken about in Lakers circles. Doesn't solve all your problems, but certainly addresses some. Pretty good wing defender, very good outside shooter, and would, to say the least, probably have more open shots than he's seen in years playing with Luka and LeBron. Fits where he could play the 3. LeBron naturally slides to the 4. You have Claxton at the 5 or something like that. Cam Johnson, Cam Thomas is a name that, sort of controversial around NBA circles, but improved a great deal last year before the Nets just, anybody who could make a bucket was shut down so they could get a better pick. There is that option, what I'm talking about here, of maybe getting depth, 2 or 3 players in a trade where Reaves is the guy that, okay, fine, you can get Reaves, but now you've got to give us 2 or 3 players or a couple different assets or something like that, and maybe coming out that way. I know the Lakers have said, long-winded, but Lakers have said foundational piece, but there is another alternative. Would you consider that?
It would depend on the particulars. With Brooklyn, just because we're running with this Brooklyn example,
sure,
who comes back with Nic Claxton, but also, too, who goes out with Austin? Because let's just say, for example, I don't know the money in front of me. I'm not getting into those weeds, but let's just say we're talking about Austin and Rui for Nic Claxton and Cam Johnson. That to me feels like a sideways move. I don't think you are getting any better that way.
Johnson's not better, significantly better than Rui. A little better defensively, better ball mover.
I don't know if he's actually better defensively. I think it depends on the matchup. Cam Johnson has been extremely up and down as a defender, but he's
better by reputation, if nothing else,
sure.
And he can play the 3 more than the 4.
This was also years ago when he was on Phoenix, and back when Phoenix was actually a serious team.
Right.
Now Phoenix has since become an unserious team, and the Nets are an unserious team, but that's none of our business.
And Cam Johnson is a little older and has
he's got a lot of injury
health problems.
Right. But I don't think Austin and Rui for Nic Claxton and Cam Johnson makes them considerably better, even if you want to say it balances the roster more to some degree. But if, say, you were talking about Austin and Maxi Kleber and Shake Milton for Nic Claxton and Cam Johnson, I don't know for sure if I do it, but that at least seems to be a trade that could make the Lakers better. Whereas the Austin and Rui piece of it, to me, is sideways at best. So a lot of this is you're going to really have to start drilling down on those details. And certainly we saw in the playoffs, not just with the Lakers, but across the NBA, depth matters. And, this notion that once the playoffs begin, everyone cuts down to 6 or 7 players and your depth is overrated. We're starting to see not as much as
sort of. Yeah.
You want to have more options. You want to have more options that you think are playable. And when you don't have them, it starts to become problematic for teams around the league. A lot of the ones that have got eliminated are the ones that have found themselves dealing with lesser depth. It's not the sole reason they got eliminated, but it was an issue for the Lakers. It was an issue for Denver. Like, it has happened for teams across the league. Again, it's not exclusive to every single team that is advanced or not advanced, but I think we are starting to get to a place now where depth matters a little bit more, especially considering I think we're also starting to realize that this style of play in the new NBA, while maybe not as old school pounding as people remember the 90s and early 2000s, it is quite taxing, and it is really draining on people's bodies. It's leading to a lot of injuries. It could be a conversation for another show, but I think the depth of options is starting to matter a lot, and the Lakers' depth could use some improvement.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I think the depth question, it's not so much like what do you like 1 through 9. but it's like, are you viable 1 through 5, 1 through 6? Like, do you really, the problem with the Lakers wasn't that that their 6th and 7th and 8th guys weren't good enough. It's that
according to JJ Redick, they weren't.
Well, they absolutely weren't. But like the bigger problem was in this series, in a lot of ways, their 3rd, 4th, and 5th guys weren't good enough. Like the Nuggets were kind of eaten away, not necessarily just because Strother had like one great game, but like wasn't, or like, they're not getting enough from Zeke Naji and guys like that. It's because Michael Porter Jr. wasn't very good. Like, and he's banged up, but like you need 4 or 5 really, either your stars have to be incredible, and it's hard to do. I mean, as down as some of Jokic's games were, he still was left the playoffs as the top playoff leader in like basically every statistical category. So the Lakers have to figure out what kind of depth they need, what kind of fit they can put together. It's a lot of work. And so it's something that we'll keep talking about for sure. Keep leaving us questions, keep leaving us comments. Want to get into this a little bit of nostalgia for the Lakers, former Lakers that are playing prominent roles in the Western Conference Finals, and answer a question that somebody left about LeBron. Do all that next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by Skims, and I am someone who is super picky about underwear. I only like to wear boxer briefs. It is all I wear, and they have to have a certain feel, certain tightness, but also certain looseness. It's like Goldilocks. They got to be just right. So when I heard that we at Locked On could get ourselves some Skims underwear, my first thought was Skims makes men's underwear, and turns out, yeah, they do. So then my next question was, am I going to like them? And the answer is, oh, hell yeah, I'm going to like them. I tried the 3-inch and 5-inch boxer briefs, and the only difference is one's 3 inches, one's 5 inches. Otherwise, they are exactly the same, which is awesome. They're both really comfortable. They're soft. They don't bunch up. They feel great on my skin. They look great too. Like, partner's going to enjoy how you look at them. Highly recommend. Shop Skims Men's at skims.com/LockedOnNBA and Skims stores. Let them know we sent you. This is extremely important. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey, and then select our show, Locked On Lakers, in the drop-down menu that follows. We want the credit. Help us help you, and then help us again. Skims is the official underwear partner of the NBA, WNBA, and USA Basketball.
Prominent Lakers, Andy, playing a role, former Lakers playing a role in teams advancing into the conference finals in the Eastern Conference. Of course, Josh Hart is a critical piece for the New York Knicks and has played great all season long. He's had a great season. It's been really fun to watch. In the West, obviously, Lakers fans saw what Julius Randle was doing for Minnesota. That was sad. Good for Julius, kind of sad. And Alex Caruso is playing a big role for the Thunder, and that is especially sad because it's a role that the Lakers really could have used themselves, and there's still no reason that he was let go.
Nope.
I remember, actually, I was on vacation when that happened, and it was, emergency. We just launched the YouTube channel, I think, too, on the network. And I put it up there, and I remember people being like, settle down, it's just one guy, whatever.
Yeah, we tried to tell y'all. We tried to tell you, get over it, man. Get over it. It's Alex Caruso. You guys are just overrated. No, really not. Nope. Really not.
Nope.
It's funny too.
And let him go for no reason, just money.
No, well, money, and then because you badly misevaluated the question between him and Taylor Horton Tucker. Like, if you're going to decide this because of a self-induced monetary decision, which again should have kept them both, whatever. But if you're going to choose between the two, you got to choose right. And they chose both the wrong player and the more expensive player on top of the wrong player. But I tweeted out a photo, I believe it was game 5 of Knicks Pacers, where Josh Hart ended up getting bloodied across his face. And
That was
I
game
said
5,
that he quite literally gave his blood, sweat, and tears for the Knicks to get into the Eastern Conference Finals. And that pick ended up generating and ginning up a lot of baby Lakers nostalgia that I didn't necessarily expect just from that photo, but it reminded me of a piece that I wrote when Brian and I covered the Lakers for The Athletic. It was one of the first pieces that I wrote talking about, and this was we got hired right around the time when everybody was gearing up for, at the time it felt like LeBron and Paul George joining the Lakers. And with that expectation, it was like, what's going to happen with Julius Randle and Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart, Kyle Kuzma, Larry Nance Jr., all down the line. And I wrote a piece about how, look, nobody knows what this young core of kids could do. Could they win a championship together? I said, I'm paraphrasing a bit of myself, but it's not out of the question, but the odds don't favor it, just because the odds don't favor most teams winning a championship. And you will increase your odds if you bring in somebody like LeBron and some established all-star, all-NBA level outsiders. But that championship that you win with those outsiders, it's awesome. You will be excited by it, but it will never feel exactly the same as a championship that's spearheaded by at least a couple of your own guys. And I ended the piece by saying there will always be a part of me wondering about a sliding doors version of the Lakers, the sliding door version that is basically just Lonzo, B.I., Randall, Hart, Kuzma, Nance, Zubats down the line.
I mean, obviously they're not going to be able to keep.
They're not going to be able to keep them all, but some combination of those, some combination of those groups. And I ended it by saying there will always be a part of me wondering about a sliding doors version of the Lakers, and I won't be alone. And every now and then, whenever fans see these former Lakers that maybe they were a little bit more attached to in the moment than they realized, because there was frustration and uncertainty about the direction of the team, you realize, like, yeah, these guys were pretty fun. You never knew what was going to become of it exactly, but they were fun.
Yeah, I mean,
there's something fun about wondering where things can go, as opposed to having the expectation of where it's supposed to.
I was about to say, I mean, like those seasons weren't fun because,
except you and I did Lakers pre and post for 710 ESPN, as well as covering the team for The Athletic. I always said I found those kids fun to cover. I didn't like how the Lakers wouldn't just lean into developing them.
Well, right. There was part of the reason.
I didn't like the process involved with them, but I actually found them fun and intriguing. It was
and just
kind of exciting.
It was a lot of losing is what I was getting at. They lost a lot of games. It
didn't bother me though.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the feeling, and then certainly those players knew it as well, that they were only there as placeholders, and so that had an impact. But it is, look, I mean, these are all good players. I don't think none of them have developed into first team, frontline, lead a team type stars, but there were a lot of 2 through 7 on that team. It was a lot of good players that have all had very solid NBA careers.
I'm not saying the Lakers did anything wrong. I'm just saying, like, it's just different. It's just a different thing.
No, it is. It's funny too, like, because people say, like, what if the Lakers had drafted Tatum instead of Lonzo? Like, how would that have changed the arc of the Lakers? Like, really would have changed the arc of the Pelicans, because that's where Jason Tatum would have been part of the Anthony Davis deal.
Yeah.
What I think would have happened is
you maybe get to keep Josh Hart.
You maybe get to keep Josh Hart. Maybe you get to keep some other guys. Like, I don't know what happens to the fight. Maybe you can treat, like, because they basically renounced Randall, if I'm remembering all this correctly, to make room for LeBron.
Well, it was more to make room ultimately for Rondo. Like the Rondo salary, but there had been concerns about the fit with Randall and LeBron. And that whole season, Randall's last season with the Lakers, they treated him pretty badly. Like they challenged him heading into that season. They challenged him to come into camp in the best shape of his life. He did. He came in ripped. He had a great preseason, and they had just signed Brook Lopez, and Randall and Lopez at the time felt like just like a perfect pairing. And they began the season playing Randall off the bench in ways that made absolutely no sense, other than it was predetermined that Randall was not part of the core, so they wanted to see other guys.
Right.
They eventually started Randall because he was playing so well, they had no other choice. But it was very obvious, like nakedly obvious, that they had no interest in Randall long term. You and I actually interviewed Julius the following year. We did a long sit down with him for The Athletic, and we asked him, like, were you surprised in any way that this happened? He said, nope. Like it was pretty obvious.
Yeah, you talk about the numbers. Dumb. No, he is definitely not. You talk about the numbers. That season, he averaged 16 points a game, which is a function as much of the minutes as anything else. But 16 points, 8 rebounds, 2.5 assists. He shot 56% from the floor that year, so he was doing good work. There wasn't anything wrong with that. Like I said, like the Tatum thing, like, do you get to hold on to Josh Hart? What Josh Hart, a player like that, might have meant for the Lakers roster this year. And it's funny, like, I think when you talk about depth, again, it's not so much like, is your 7th player awesome? Is your 5th guy like capable of doing lots of stuff? The Lakers had too many players who sort of were able to be taken out of the series, whether based on the fit, Jackson Hayes just not being quite up to the moment in ways I think you had to really sort of, if they were just sort of crossing their fingers and hoping. But DFS was a non-factor in most ways. And, then you start getting into, and I'm not blaming the role guys here. Primarily I think that, I've said this before, I'll say it again, the single player that underperformed most relative to expectations was Austin Reaves. It wasn't Rui. It wasn't Gabe Vincent. It wasn't Dorian Finney-Smith. It was Austin Reaves. And that made a huge difference. But then for all the good that they did, Luka, he was sick. That didn't help, but Bats had some bad fourth quarters. LeBron, for all that he did, the numbers overall were really good. They needed more from him in the fourth quarters. Now, you need less if you have a guy like Josh Hart, or in that first round, like what McDaniels did, what they got out of some of these other players, DiVincenzo for a game here and there, whatever it is, you get away with more stuff. You have more margin for error.
And this is 6 years ago. You don't know, there's no way to plan on Josh Hart or baby Laker X still being on this team.
Right. It's more of a, like, there was an attitude of sort of disposability around players that weren't stars that they need to, I think they're working on getting past, but it was a real problem back then. And like a carelessness with asset management. Like, okay, guy's not going to be part of your core. You want to flip people so you can bring in LeBron James. Okay. I think, Anthony, you want to trade guys for Anthony Davis? These are reasonable propositions, but there was just a carelessness with their asset management that they certainly can't afford to do now.
Nope. Not
all right. Locked On Lakers didn't get to this LeBron question. LeBron, we'll get to it. Locked On Lakers on YouTube. Watch it. I forget how I normally end this show, but we'll be back tomorrow and I'll try again. See everyone tomorrow.